He was just a teenager, excited to travel like anyone else. But to the pilot, his skin color was enough to raise suspicion. Within minutes, a call to the police turned a normal flight into a nightmare of humiliation. A boy, accused without reason, stared down a system that had failed so many before him. But what the pilot didn't know was that this time, he wasn't just targeting a passenger. He was targeting the son of one of the most powerful men in aviation. What happened next would change everything. If this story is keeping you hooked, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. It was a clear afternoon when Jordan arrived at the airport. Just 16, he carried nothing more than a backpack and the excitement of flying alone for the very first time. His sneakers squeaked lightly against the polished floor as he followed the signs, clutching his boarding pass like it was a golden ticket. For him, this trip meant more than just travel. It meant independence, a step closer to the future he dreamed about. Jordan wasn't the loud, attention-seeking type. He was thoughtful, polite, the kind of kid who always said, "Thank you," to the gate agent and offered his seat to an older passenger in the waiting area. To anyone watching, he looked like any other teenager beginning his adventure. But beneath the ordinary scene, something else was building. As he settled into his seat near the window, Jordan noticed the curious glances. A flight attendant walked, passed once, then again, eyes lingering a little too long. He tried to brush it off, convincing himself it was nothing. But the unease grew with every passing minute. He didn't know it yet, but one person's suspicion was about to turn his dream trip into a nightmare and place him at the center of a confrontation he could never have imagined. Jordan tried to distract himself by looking out the window, watching the airport staff load luggage below. But the unease only grew stronger. Every time a flight attendant passed by, their eyes flickered back to him, as if measuring, questioning, doubting. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but then the whispers started. Short glances exchanged between the crew. A nod toward his row and the unmistakable shift in tone when they passed his seat. The tension thickened when the pilot himself stepped out of the cockpit during boarding. Tall, stern, with the kind of authority that filled the aisle, he scanned the cabin casually until his gaze landed on Jordan. It lingered. Too long. Jordan's stomach tightened. He looked down, clutching his backpack against his chest. But the damage was done. He could feel the suspicion, heavy and unjust, pressing down on him. Minutes later, Jordan noticed the pilot leaning toward the flight attendant, speaking in hushed tones. Their eyes cut back to him, confirming the fear that had been growing inside. Something was happening, and he was at the center of it. By the time passengers began settling in, the pilot had already made a decision. Without a word to Jordan, he pulled out his phone and made a call. The boy didn't know who it was, too, but the stiffness in the man's shoulders, the glances toward the cabin door, and the way the crew avoided looking at him told him enough. This wasn't a routine check. This was an accusation being born from nothing more than the color of his skin. The aircraft buzzed with normal chatter, children laughing, bags shifting overhead, but Jordan's world had gone silent. Every second felt stretched, every breath heavy. He wasn't sure what would happen when they landed, but the pit in his stomach told him it wasn't good. He replayed every move in his head, boarding, showing his ticket, sitting quietly, searching for anything that could have triggered suspicion. But there was nothing. Nothing except who he was. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Jordan stared. At the seat in front of him, his heart pounding. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he hoped this was just paranoia, that when they landed, he could simply walk out like everyone else. But deep down, he knew something was waiting for him beyond those airport gates, and it wouldn't be freedom. When the plane landed, Jordan's heart sank at the sight of flashing lights waiting outside the terminal window. Passengers around him stirred with curiosity, whispering, craning their necks toward the gate. But Jordan knew before anyone else did, those officers weren't here for just anyone. They were here for him. As the door opened and travelers began to shuffle out, Jordan stayed seated, frozen in place. The aisle felt like it was closing in. Then came the moment he feared. A uniformed officer stepped inside, scanning the cabin until his eyes locked onto the nervous boy in the window seat. Without hesitation, he walked over. "Stand up." The words were sharp, commanding, final. Jordan's legs trembled as he rose, clutching his backpack like it could shield him from the stairs. Passengers leaned away, some pulling out phones, recording the scene. His cheeks burned with humiliation as whispers spread. What did he do? Why him? The officer gripped his arm firmly, guiding him toward the exit as if he were a criminal caught in the act. Jordan wanted to scream that he had done nothing wrong, but his voice stayed trapped in his throat. Each step down the aisle felt heavier, as if the weight of centuries of suspicion and prejudice pressed down on him. At the front, the pilot stood just outside the cockpit door, arms crossed, face unreadable but satisfied. For him, this was just procedure. For Jordan, it was a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. And then, as the officers led him toward the waiting terminal, Jordan realized this moment wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about survival. The wrong move, the wrong word, and he could become another headline. The crowd's eyes bore into him. Phones flashed. Every second stretched longer, sharper. This was the breaking point, the place where his life, his reputation, and his safety all hung in the balance. As Jordan was led off the plane, the murmurs of passengers still buzzing behind him, he braced himself for the worst. The officers guided him toward the terminal, their grip firm, their questions sharp. He felt stripped of dignity, exposed to a humiliation he hadn't earned. And then, everything shifted. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward, his badge clipped neatly to his jacket. The crowd hushed. The officers paused. The man's expression was calm, but his presence commanded the room. It was Jordan's father, not just a protective parent rushing to his son's side, but the Federal Aviation Administration. Administrator, the man who oversaw the very pilots trusted with millions of lives. The silence that followed was deafening. The pilot, standing a few steps away, stiffened as recognition dawned. His authority, his suspicion, his unfounded call, all of it crumbled in an instant. The weight of his decision now bore down on him, visible in the sudden pallor of his face. He hadn't just profiled a teenager. He had profiled the son of the man who held his career in his hands. Jordan's father didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough. The officers loosened their grip. The passengers who had doubted, who had whispered, now looked on with shame. But for Jordan, the damage was already done. No position of power, no sudden reversal could erase the sting of being treated as guilty for simply existing. And that's the truth this story leaves behind. Because while Jordan's father could intervene, how many others don't have someone in power to step in? How many more lives are scarred, diminished, or lost because suspicion comes before fairness? The question lingers long after the scene, fades. How many times must prejudice play out before we finally learn to see each other with humanity instead of fear?